Welcome to MAGICademy podcast. Today, our guest is Stella, and so excited that we have Stella joining us. She has been an evangelist to pioneering neuroscience into the space of learning development, and her startup, Stella Lab, integrated AI features to align learning design with business development and behavior change and performance improvement in the organizational space. So, welcome, Stella, to our podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I've lived in 4 countries. My book, Neuroscience to Learning Development, has been translated into 4 languages. I started life as a psychologist, but when I started work, I worked as a COBOL programmer and an IT kind of technologist. So I kind of had the IT background, fell into learning development, absolutely loved it, and I continue to kind of increase my knowledge and application of the science of learning into real world practice. Co-founded Stella Labs 4 years ago. Moved to Belgium especially to do that, and we're just really excited about how our mission is to make sure that every minute spent learning is worth it.
Beautiful. And why Stella Labs? I know you wrote a book about like neuroscience and learning development, and Stella Lab is currently kind of integrating your research and philosophy and approach into the product. So before we move into like the detailed product thing, what's your mission and vision for Stella Labs?
So it kind of started with my co-founder, actually, who ran a previous business where they did a lot of training of young, talented people in the technology sector. And he realized he had no idea whether that training was having impact. He couldn't measure it. Nobody could tell him. The trainers couldn't tell him. The people who were on the training couldn't tell him. And he began to get really frustrated, thinking, well, I'm putting a lot of money and effort into this, but I have no idea. So he started researching about effective learning, read my book, tracked me down. I was living in Spain at the time. Tracked me down, and I started doing some consulting work with him. Long story short, we decided we would start a business together. And so I was originally helping him find a co-founder for him to work with, but we couldn't find one. He one day said to me, Stella, I think it's you. For many years, I'd run my previous company and always wanted somebody else to work with who was a sort of more entrepreneurial. So we kind of came together and it just really worked. And the really funny thing is he actually had the name Stella Labs before he actually met me. So it's like, it was meant to be. It was written in the stars.
Oh, this is such a beautiful story. And sometimes the best type of collaboration is something that we didn't expect, and like it's just fall into places. Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I've been reading your book. Like one of the major message that you kind of want to get across through that is the ability to transfer learning into actual behavior change and performance improvement. And you said there's only like 15% of learning actually go through the transfer. Can you share with us a little bit more through the learning science perspective and why is this happening? Can we just transfer 100%?
So in terms of the science, we still don't have the ability to put a chip into somebody's head and magically have all the knowledge and skills. So until we do we're going to have to keep working with brains. And brains take time to learn. It's a very energy consuming process. It happens over time. It doesn't happen immediately. So we do know that, only about 15 to 20% of people actively transfer their learning into the workplace. And one of the big challenges is that they're just not getting the right sort of training. The training that's happening isn't really working. There's been lots of research by this, and I recommend a book by Ina Weinbauer-Heidel. Maybe I can send you the link later on. And she talks about there being 3 big kind of buckets that are preventing transfer from happening. One is learners aren't motivated. Why am I doing this course? Why am I doing compliance training? I don't understand why I'm doing this. So they don't feel motivated. There's nothing in it personally for them. So that's a really key one, that you get people motivated in the first place. So they understand the benefit to them and hopefully the benefit to the organisation too. So the motivation one's really important. The second thing that's really important is the training has to be designed with transfer in mind. Most training is designed to share information. Some training you might be lucky and get kind of, some workshop experience as well, but very little training is designed to take you into the workplace so you actively do things in the workplace. So the design is really important. And then the last piece is the organizational support. So I can tell you a story from my previous, IT days. I was sent on an Oracle database course. I was working in IT, so, and I was using Oracle software. Before I went to the course, nobody told me why I was doing it. I had no project to work on. The course itself was extremely dull and boring and mostly consisted of an expert at the front talking to us. And when I finished the course, I got back to work. I had no project to apply what I was doing it to. And not one single person said to me, how was that course? What did you learn? How can I support you? So I know nothing about Oracle databases. The only thing I can remember from that course is I could do this better. And that's a good example that, people go back to work, their managers are busy, their supervisors are busy, and they haven't got time, or sometimes they haven't got the skills or the confidence to say, you've been on that training program. What did you learn? How can I help you implement what you've learned? What skills do you now have that, sometimes the manager doesn't have those skills. They don't even know what it is the new person's learned. So that can make them a little bit unconfident. So that whole kind of organizational support, do people have the opportunity to apply, and are they being supported to apply what they've learned in the workplace? Or are they just being, told, get on with your job, it's important?
Yeah, and I think it's quite common because people have all this will to share and to teach and to coach, but sometimes they just don't have enough neuroscience background, how learning happens, how learning transfer, to kind of power their thinking and design. Because when you're thinking about design, it really takes a lot. You have to constantly learn and think and experiment. So, and that kind of moving to my next question. You have this framework called GEARS. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you kind of guide, experiment, apply, and all that?
So the GEAR framework is slightly bigger than the guide, experiment, apply. The first thing to think about when we show an image of the GEAR methodology is the end result is transfer. That's what you're aiming at. So it's always with, what's the outcome we're focused on? That the person who's learning something can do the job in the flow of work. So they have the skills, the behavior, the attitude, the confidence to do it. So that's the goal. When we show the image, there's a green line that runs through it, and that green line is all about motivation. So it's making sure that the person is motivated to remain on track, to persist with the learning. When sometimes learning is difficult, sometimes you don't get it right, sometimes, practice can be exhausting, practice can be boring. You might find obstacles in your path. So it's thinking about what are all those obstacles and how can we keep that person really motivated, get them motivated in the first place. They need to know why they're doing it. That why is really important.
Why?
And then keep them there. So then the GEAR really starts. So the guide is any learning needs to start with an introduction, some information or an experience or a recognition that there's this thing I didn't know about, and now I recognize there is some more. Creating that kind of curiosity gap is really important. So you need some information, but that information that guides people needs to be structured appropriately for the level of the person who's doing the learning. And it needs to be not overwhelming. Our brains are really, really clever, but we suffer with cognitive overload. We try and force too much information at once, we suffer from cognitive overload. So that's guide material also has to be, engaging, but not cognitively overloading. So that's the guide part.
Okay.
The experiment is you take that information, that experience, whatever it might be, and then you need to experiment in a safe environment. There's no good just having something brand new and then just being thrown into the workplace and having to do it. That's quite scary. You can do that, but it's not the best way. So the best way is to experiment in a safe environment. That could be in a scenario-based training, that could be in a workshop, we call them live labs. It can be something where you've also got somebody else checking, that you're doing it right, showing you how to do it, helping you do it, giving you good examples, and checking that you're doing it right and giving you feedback. That's the apply part. Sorry, that was the experiment part. Then you've got the apply part, which is, yes, now I feel confident enough that I can apply this new thing, in a kind of a safe place in the workplace, but actually in the workplace. So if you were learning presentation skills, you wouldn't ask somebody to step out into a group of, an audience of 200 or 2,000. You'd say, well, can you present to your team this week? Something like that. So it's real activities that the person has to do in the flow of their work, things they'd be doing anyway, but applying this new learning to it and getting feedback again from somebody who can observe that they're doing it and give them really good feedback, we call it feed forward, that says, this is what you've done well, and this is what you can do to improve even more. And then the final piece is the retain. This is about making sure that the knowledge we need to retain, skills sometimes require knowledge, and certainly stuff at work requires knowledge. You're retaining that through what's called spaced repetition. So you as the learner are being prompted to recall that information over time at kind of specified intervals, and spaced repetition is a really well-known practice within psychology to improve memory. But you're also being asked to continue to practice and grow those skills. So you don't just go and do a presentation once and that's it. You need the following week to do another presentation, and 2 weeks later to do perhaps a presentation with a bigger audience, whatever it might be. But it's that kind of retention until you feel, I've kind of mastered that skill at this level. There may be many more levels to go, but that's the retention piece.
That reminds me of like a game, kind of like you have the motivation and you wanted to kind of do it in a safe environment, like kind of a lab, a safe environment. Then you go out into level 1 where the real situations start to come, and you have someone who you can trust and provide your feedback as you perform and implement this change. And then you go on to the next level. So it's always growing, always developing. That's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's beautiful. And so you also mentioned something about the kind of gap, right? You mentioned about the gap between the training development versus the business objectives. And there has been a kind of trend in the learning development space that as learning development leaders, we're no longer just leading learning design or content or training development. We're tapping into more of this business space. And can you share with us, like, how, coming from your perspective, the learning development can best align with the business objectives and help organizations as a business entity to grow and develop?
So there's all sorts of things in there to unpack.
Yeah, I know. It's like a big
the first thing is that you need to recognize as a learning and development person that you are a part of the business. You're not separate, which has sometimes happened. You are a part of the business, and you need to not just be creating fancy courses because somebody comes and asks you. You need to challenge those stakeholders. You need to work with those stakeholders to say, well, why do you want this training? What's the purpose of this training? What is it you want people to do? That's a really important question to ask. What do you want people to do as a result of this training? Whereas very often in L&D, we become order takers. People come and say, can you run a time management course? Can you run a leadership course? Can you do whatever it is? And we say, oh, yes, and we've got lots of ideas and we create something. But we haven't aligned with the purpose, which is then very hard then to sort of, if the purposes aren't aligned, you might have created a program that doesn't actually solve the problem that needs to be solved. So it's about a kind of constant dialogue between the business and learning and development and the learner. It should be a three-way conversation.
The triangle.
Is this matching what we need?
Beautiful.
So I think that part of it is really important, that you become part of the business. And one of the big challenges for L&D has been that up until recently, we either can't or we've been reluctant to really measure the impact of what we're doing. We have happy sheets that say, you know, the learners liked it, they liked the lunch, they thought the training was fun. But training that's fun doesn't necessarily actually lead to good learning, doesn't lead to actual change in behaviour. So we need to stop thinking about that aspect of it and really start measuring the impact. You know, can we see a change in the way the person is doing that? And that's too difficult for just us in learning and development. We need those people who are in the business who can observe what this person is now doing now they've gone back into the workplace and has some idea of, you know, how they were performing before. So it's this
Yeah.
constant kind of triangle.
Yeah, and it takes like at least three group of folks to kind of work in harmony.
One of the things our platform does that really enhances this, I think, is right at the
Yeah.
start, somebody comes along and says, we want a course on X, and the platform says, okay, so what do you want? You know, what do you want people to learn? Who are the people you want to learn it? Because that level is really important. And what's the industry? Because that can also impact it. And that's what we've found seem to be three key questions that you ask the AI. The AI then generates behaviors. So it generates suggestive behaviors. And it's really nice then to have a conversation with a stakeholder and say, look, here are some suggestive behaviors that, you know, based on what you've just told me you want to train, here are some suggestive behaviors. Shall we modify those to make sure they're really, really what you're looking for? And that conversation is really important, but it becomes much easier because you've already got something in front of people that they can kind of discuss. It's much easier to discuss something if it's concrete and you can see it than if you just say to a manager or a leader in the business, the question, what do you want people to do, is really important. You keep having to go back to that. But if you just ask them that, they're not necessarily sure. If you give them some examples, they can say, oh, yes, that's what we want. But this one we need to change slightly. And actually, no, we don't need that. That's not relevant. So that's a really important part of the process of designing for us, that those questions get asked and challenged and bring in those key stakeholders. You can be an expert in your field, so you can validate that the content is correct, that the kind of activities people are going to practice are correct, because you know that part of it. But the system actually builds the learning track for you based on the science. So you can have subject matter experts in anything. You can now start to build a really effective training program, but without them having to know how learning really works. Because not everybody's going to become a neuroscientist.
Yeah, that's true. Because when we talk about learning science, it's usually sounds very daunting. So that's great that you're kind of helping people to digest and apply that immediately without all the times of investing to learn the learning science piece.
And it's just that the AI is not only there to sort of help nudge and guide people, but of course it speeds up the process of the design enormously. So our platform, you put in these key parameters, you have this discussion around behaviors, you press go, and within 10 minutes, you've got a pretty 70-80% complete training program built in 10 minutes. Yes, you've got to validate it. Yes, you've probably got to do some edits and you might want to add some pieces. But it's taken away so much of the work that, traditionally would take people 2 or 3 months sometimes to create a training program. Which means
and I
that
think
you can also adapt to, rapid change. So if your organization changes really quickly and process changes or information changes, you can then have training that's really, really up to date, because you can do it in an afternoon.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because time is our most precious resource. Same with health. And so being able to roll out a training development program that aligns with business goals and adaptively, it's very important. If we can save time, we save life. So what kind of data points does Stella Lab with the AI function track, and how does that align with the business improvement, the behavior improvement?
So we track all sorts of things, to be honest. One of the first things we track is engagement. Do people appear to be engaged? Are they going through the process? Are they completing activities? Are they connecting with the content and the information they read? we really track what we call work-based actions. So those are the pieces in the apply piece. So our people, so basically a learner is a work-based action is suggested to them. They can edit that and manipulate that so that it's kind of relevant to their workplace, and they can schedule it. And they're then nudged to make sure that they are reminded to do it. And whilst they're nudged, they also get to select a mentor. That's usually a manager or a supervisor, somebody who can see them do their job. So the mentor is also told, for instance, Gianni, you've just done presentation skills and we need you to present to your team next week, for instance. Your manager now knows that. And your manager now has a little bit of information about what is being expected of you, to present what you learn, what's going to be expected. So they can kind of observe you. After you've done that presentation, you're invited back into the platform to sort of say, this is what I personally, Gianni, did, and this is what I think I've done well, and this is what I can improve. And then your mentor can also see that, and they can comment and say, absolutely, Gianni, you did a fantastic job, and next week you can do this other thing. So you're getting that kind of feedback in the flow of work on the real task. So that measurement is really important, and we see a really strong correlation between that measurement from has the mentor been active compared to how active is the learner in the platform. Because if you know somebody's kind of keeping a track, you're more likely to keep going, aren't you?
Yeah, that's the motivation piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, part of the motivation, part of it, certainly it's extrinsic motivation. Other things we can track, so we can track all the questioning that happens. We can check, are people getting those questions right or wrong? We can check the scenarios, are they getting those right or wrong? So you can sort of see how people are doing. And again, that goes out from, traditional training was traditionally, 2 days, 2 weeks, whatever it might be of training. And at the end of it, you're evaluated, or you evaluate the course. But we're tracking out longer than that. We track out for usually about 3 months into the workplace. Are you still applying those skills? Are you seen to apply those skills? People often don't get to 100% completion, because by the time they get there, they're already doing the thing at work, which is what you were hoping for. But we've shifted where the measurements happen to much longer in the learning process, to much further on in the learning process.
Is 3 months kind of coming from like the neuroscience perspective, is 3 months like the ideal kind of way for a new skill or new performance to settle? It's like the 3 months.
It's kind of, there's no actual fixed figure. It depends what you're learning and how you're learning it and how many opportunities you get to practice and do that thing. There's no fixed amount. We just kind of, and we can talk with organizations. It doesn't have to be 3 months. You can do it in 2 months. You can do it but it's a goal beyond the event has finished. But this tracking continues. This tracking and nudging with the spaced repetition and the work-based actions continues. So 3 months is kind of, you can be pretty certain after 3 months that either people aren't going to do it at all, or they've got it.
So it's more kind of like the amount of engagement between the learner with the content and the learner with actual practice.
Yes.
So if they have a very intense amount of interactions, then maybe 1 month. But if it's like paced out, then
if you got back to work and you did I have a good example actually. When I first started in the training world, I was running 3 2-hour programs every day for 6 weeks. So I worked on a project where that's what we were doing. By the end of that 6 weeks, my training skills had improved immeasurably, because every day I had 3 different groups. So each group was different, so it was amazing. That was a really good way for me to really develop my skills really fast. I can keep improving them, of course, but that was a great immersive experience.
I love that. And I would like to kind of pivot the question a little bit toward kind of the role the curiosity plays, because you're talking about the green line, which is the kind of the motivation. So how do you define curiosity, or is curiosity the same as childlike wonder? Is this two different things? And does they contribute to motivation in terms of like skill development and learning?
I think curiosity at a very basic level is pretty much a release of dopamine. Or actually, it's the kind of precursor to the release of dopamine. So curiosity is that gap between, what I know or what I believe and what I don't know yet. It's very related to fear. That they're on a kind of continuum. So they actually dopamine operates in the same part of your brain, nucleus accumbens. If dopamine acts at the front of the nucleus accumbens, you feel curiosity. If it acts at the back, you feel fear. That kind of makes sense because it's what keeps us alive, doesn't it? There's something new here. I don't know what it is. I could be curious and explore, or I could be frightened and I could run away. And either option might be good or might be bad. You don't really know until you test it. So
Oh,
curiosity is a real driver for learning. So if you can get people curious, they're much more likely to learn something than if you make them frightened, and they're more likely to run away.
what's the factors that make people fear versus curious? Like, what's the how
I think
to
there's. I'm not an expert in this at all, so you probably have to ask a curiosity expert. But there's
curiosity?
some obvious factors, aren't there? Have you been curious in the past and had good results, or have you been curious in the past and something horrible's happened? You're more likely to feel fear. Have you been supported when you've been curious, or do people say shut up, stop asking questions? So I think there's all sorts of different things, and and there's going to be genetic differences as well as to how dopamine acts in your brain and things. So huge
Mm.
amounts of difference. But I think the key thing with curiosity is most children are very curious, more curious than adults, because adults know more, so they don't need to be as curious as children. But as children, how you're treated as a child, if you're exposed to different things and given an open environment, you're more likely to be curious than and there is good results, you're more likely to be curious than if every time you kind of put your head out, it gets smacked. You're less likely to remain curious.
So it's all based on the environment feedback, and that kind of resonate back
Yeah, it's
to
going to be nature
what we've
and
been.
nurture always.
Yeah, beautiful. So as we kind of take a pause and then look into the future, um, what will be the best future that you can see with the advancement of AI, or with the continuous advancement of AI, with virtual reality, with neural links, where potentially we can put a chip in our brain and we can download a particular skill. And so how do what's the kind of best future that you see from your perspective?
I mean, I think all these things are completely fascinating and very exciting. But I hear in my brain, he's a psychologist a neuroscientist in the UK. And one of the things he says is tech is making us stupid because we don't have to use our memories anymore to retain telephone numbers. We don't have to use our memories to remember facts. We just go and Google it. So in some ways, if we overuse the tech, then we'll just stop our brains from doing any of the work. And the thing with the brain is it's like your body, it's like muscles in your body, that you have to use it in order for it to remain active. If you don't use it, your body is not going to waste energy on your very energy hungry brain if you're not using it. So I think all the tech, the VR and the AR is great for kind of helping people learn things much more in the flow of work. It's a much more immersive experience than reading a book or sitting watching a blackboard or a whiteboard or whatever it might be. So I think they're really useful, but we have to be careful, I think, not to stop using our brains.
Mm. Or is it possible that part of the brain will be less used as time goes by, and then the other part of the brain will be ever more activated? Maybe there's some sort of.
It's entirely possible. There's a very famous story about London taxi drivers. So they were measured to have an enlarged hippocampus because they had to do this test called I think it's called the map or the guide, I can't remember, it doesn't matter what the test is called. They have to learn every street in London. And they were found to have an enlarged hippocampus compared to bus drivers who just follow the same route all the time. They've followed up on those people. Once they retire from being taxi drivers, their hippocampus goes back to being a much more normal size because they don't need to retain that information anymore. And I suspect that taxi drivers now, the knowledge, that's what the test is called, I suspect taxi drivers now in London don't have to learn the knowledge because they've got sat nav. So yes, parts of our brain will grow, but we're not only present in the workspace, we're present in a much wider part of our life. Does that mean if we can augment something in the workspace, then we're being capable of doing it outside of work?
It's an open question.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think as long as we have a drive to continuously learn and evolve with technology, I think that would be very beautiful. And so is there anyone, if people are curious, is there any thought leaders or writers or the thinkers that you follow? And if our audiences are curious, they can
I think some really interesting people to follow at the moment are Itiel Draw, who I've just mentioned.
Itiel Draw.
Philippa Hardman. She's also working the same sort of space of science and beginning to think about how AI and neuroscience come together in terms of learning. So she and I have a very similar view on things. Lauren Waldman, she's in Canada. She's called the Learning Pirate, and she is very, very interested in the neuroscience, probably less in the AI. I think she's a bit worried that it might take over. And then Amy Brown is also somebody who's used the brain a lot in kind of a bit less in learning and more about kind of performance at work and actually being a successful person at work. So I would say all four of those are interesting in terms of the science. And there's loads of other people out there too, of course.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that. I think I wanted to kind of give a recap for our audience out there. So far we've talked about Stella's story of how she co-founded Stella Labs, and then what are the GEAR framework and how GEAR framework is beautifully integrated with loads of like neuroscience knowledge into the product that's enhanced by AI to help people continuously align their training development, not only with the performance development, but also with the business objectives in the bigger picture. So the triangle of that. And we also explored the role curiosity play, how curiosity help us to feel the pleasure of dopamine and learn skills. And we also explored the potential future of where technology is developing faster and faster. What are some guardrails and challenges that we need to keep our eyes on? So very excited. We're moving to the magic phase.
Can I just add one deed?
Literally. Beautiful. So talking about the magic piece. So going back to the time when Stella was 11 years old, and what did Stella enjoy doing or creating so much that time disappears?
So when I was 11, I think I really wanted to be a fashion designer. So
you do have the vibe.
All my time drawing beautiful ladies and lovely clothes. My mum was a very good seamstress, so she also made lots of old clothes, and I learned to sew myself. So yeah, I would just spend all my time when I was 11 drawing.
Beautiful. I mean, to be honest, when I see you and your style, and when you say that you wanted to be a fashion designer, I'm not surprised. There's just like it's like in you.
Sadly, it'd love to be my next career in next time.
And yeah, and then you're bringing that design into learning, the learning development space, which we really need this sort of like energy and approach creative. And perspective. Beautiful. So is there any challenges that shaped who you are or helped you kind of inspire to develop Stella Lab? Or
so many challenges in life.
So many
challenges that inspire. Well, I guess, if I think about what perhaps inspired Stella Labs, the challenges of I've been really passionate about this kind of thing for 25 years. And even when I was at university, I was fascinated by the science of how our brains work and how we connect and communicate. So I've been fascinated by it. And I've been training using this kind of methodology for 20 years. But it's really hard to scale that because, it was just me, and then I had some associates and people I worked with. But that's not scalable. The beauty of having Stella Labs is we've now created a platform that really enables that to scale. So everybody can design a training program that is creative, uses the science of learning, and has an impact at the end of the day. You're not wasting time anymore. You're spending time hopefully enjoying the learning process, but more importantly, you've got something out of it at the end. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. So what do you think is your magic, your superpower?
I like people. I really like most people. I find it, I just think people are fascinating. So I think that's kind of what inspires me to do what I do and connect with people. And yeah, I like people.
I love that. I actually see a lot of similarities with you. I like people too, and I like beauty. I think beauty has this healing and also inspiring power. And I think if we beautifully integrate a sense of beauty into like learning design, the impact can be like massive.
Absolutely.
And I'm so grateful that you are doing this beautiful thing, integrating fashion, like appreciation of beauty, the science behind how people learn, the neurosciences, and how organizations and business develop, how people develop, and into this beautiful product that's being enhanced with AI. And so I have no doubt that there's going to be continuously new features coming as technology evolve, and ultimately people will continuously have this beautiful, impactful, and business aligned outcomes, and going through this experience that you help to curate. So great to have you, Stella. And I'm very I'm trying to be calm, but I'm like I feel like this conversation means a lot to me and to our audience. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise, and your multi-dimensional expertise into the conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.